Welcome to BYJU'S classes, and welcome to a new year, and welcome also to a new decade of the 21st century. It's been some time since we last met, and the world, it seemed, had come to a standstill in the month of December, almost till mid-January, awaiting a new dawn. It seemed that whatever was happening was focused on United States of America. Everybody was waiting for the Trump era to end. Trump had been a traumatic impact on not only America, but on international relations everywhere in the world. And people thought it was time that a new age began. And Biden finally won the elections, but not without high drama. And everybody was waiting how America, the superpower, would emerge out of this turbulence. And Trump did not disappoint. Before he moved out of the White House, he created havoc. But all that is a dramatic narrative which follows a little later. We have also decided to change the format a little since we last met. We will not only review in future main 2 or 3 events of international relations in the week, we would also like to provide a little retrospect and a background to help those of you who have no background in political science, international relations, modern history, so you understand better whatever is being talked about and you have a review of what has happened in past, so you are right there to cope with the questions. Before we proceed any further, I think a quick review of what led up to the turbulence in the United States of America before the new president-elect Biden could be inaugurated. The Trump supporters, egged on and provoked by him, lumpen groups like Proud Boys, QAnon, etc., decided to mount an insurrection and raid the Capitol building in the national capital. It was so dramatic that people armed with handguns, people armed with other battle gear, people dressed up like Viking warriors, tried to climb the walls, and they desegregated the August precinct of the Senate and the Congress, and while it was in session, trying to complete the formalities of declaring Biden the next president to be inaugurated on 20th January. They had to be carried out through secret passages to a safe place, and for a moment it seemed that the police and the people to guard against such a calamity were severely outnumbered. Now, this led to a very odd situation where people could feel, the senators and the House of Representatives members, the congressmen, could feel that what a great threat continued to confront America. Trump might finally go, which he did, but his supporters kept insisting that they had been cheated, the election had been stolen from their candidate, Trump, and also although all the legal challenges to the election of Biden failed, but what was clear is that America remains a severely divided house against itself. Although Biden's lead over Trump was massive, millions of votes in popular vote, decisive vote in the electoral college, but it cannot be denied that a sizable chunk of Americans believe in white supremacy, do not like the non-white citizen of America. They believe in no arms control. They believe in Christian evangelism. They believe that America is not a nation for immigrants, which ironically it in fact is. So all this was happening when American economy was reeling under the impact of the Corona-19 virus. Millions of people were infected, hundreds and thousands have died, and economy has suffered a nosedive. People are on social security, small businesses, medium businesses have shut down. One never knows when they will come back. And Trump's trade war against China had also impacted adversely on American economy. So America First policy seemed to be slightly misplaced, and Americans seem to be caught in a bind because of Trump's extremely unilateral interventionist foreign policy, be it North Korea, be it China, because imposing sanctions on Russia, Iran, etc. So it seemed that the whole world had been turned upside down by Trump before he went out. So where does Biden go from here? How does he begin his work? Biden, throughout his election campaign, had made it very clear, and his inaugural speech made it very clear, that his first priority was to combat with coronavirus pandemic. He promised that in the first 100 days of his presidency, he would like to inoculate 100 million people. He would try to secure vaccine to inoculate the frontline workers, the aged, the infirm as fast as possible. He would also like to have a more sensible policy of lockdown, rational, which doesn't impact on the very adversely on American economy, but is essential to break the contagion circuit. So infection should be stopped somewhere or the other. Now, this is easier said than done. Trump was a Luddite, he was an anti-science man. Once he dismissed coronavirus as Kung Fu virus, Chinese virus. He himself got afflicted with coronavirus, but came out without any change of heart or mind. He constantly ran down Dr. Fauci, his principal scientific advisor. So this made the Americans who supported Trump, the conservatives, the people who stayed in rural areas, backwaters, rednecks, who thought that the vaccine was a bit of a joke and they should not be inoculated. There is another problem. The American citizens value their liberty so highly that they were resisting lockdowns, they were resisting curbs on their movement, and this problem continues to face Biden. So Biden will have to give priority number one to fighting the COVID, but how best he can address this question remains to be seen. COVID is not the only thing. He also, in his inaugural speech, repeated, and he said, I'm a president of all America, all Americans, and his one of the great tasks is to heal the wounds which Trump had inflicted on America's body politic, America's psyche. This again is easier said than done. He would like to unify the nation, he would like to heal the wounds, but the fact remains that he's a razor-thin control of Senate. It's a 50-50 divided between Republicans and Democrats. The Senate, the casting vote of Vice President Kamala Harris can probably swing the vote in favor of President Biden's legislations. But the fact also remains that all Republicans, after the initial shock of the insurrection and the storming of the Capitol Hill, are wavering a little. They want to go back to not supporting Trump openly, but not being seen siding with Biden's so-called progressive legislation. Because some of them have, the senior senators, have their eye on the next presidential election where they think that they would be in the run also. So Biden would have to, first of all, before any healing takes place, worry about his nominations to his cabinet being confirmed by Senate. His legislation should be passed, including the legislation about providing economic relief directly to people affected by the coronavirus. All this is not going to be easy. Another challenge which remains before Biden is President Trump is the only president in the American history to have been impeached twice by the House of Representatives. But the Senate again is divided among the Republican senators, that some feel that it is unconstitutional to impeach him because you can only impeach a president and he is no longer the president. The other people do believe, including some senators in Republican camp, that Trump deserves to be punished and castigated, although he cannot be removed from office anymore because he is no longer in office, but he can probably be censored and prohibited from holding public office in future, so that rules him out of the next American presidential elections. But that again is kind of issue which cannot be wished away, which also has to be handled carefully, tactfully by Biden. Now there are two other issues before Biden. One is the Black Lives Matter movement had exposed the deep divide between the whites and the non-whites in the American society, whether they are people of color from any country, black, brown, Asian, African origin. This continues to be there. Also, the divide between the Americans who believe that to carry arms is their fundamental right and those who believe that America is primarily a nation, a Christian nation, and its values are different, and including the last-minute nominations which Trump had done to the American Supreme Court have aroused apprehensions about what kind of a legislation, what kind of a challenge Biden will have repeatedly. Trump was trying to ride roughshod over the federal structure of America. He had been resisted. He had tried to stifle dissent, but the American media had refused to bow down. But after a little gap, once you know that Trump is out of office, things change a little, and people who were anti-Trump might again, if not be anti-Trump, not be pro-Biden immediately. So this healing task, the race relations, the evangelical Christians versus the more liberal people, will continue with him. Two other things which Biden had mentioned in his campaign speeches was, one, to go back to to the climate change negotiations in Paris, and Trump had suddenly, in a peak, walked out of it, and his walking out had made the Paris summit on climate absolutely redundant. Now, it is interesting that due to coronavirus, there was a greater concern about carbon emissions, about climate change, because it aggravated the matters much more. So and you cannot say that climate change crisis is a ticking time bomb. You cannot postpone it to infinity. In next 10 years maybe, the tipping point would have been crossed. Now, unless the Americans do something about it, and the problem with America is that the American politics is quite strongly influenced by the oil energy lobby, and it is difficult to imagine, although Trump again dismissed climate change as a myth, imaginary conspiracy against America's economic progress and development, but it is not quite so. Now, China is again a large emitter because of its population, so is India, but the American credibility is totally lost if they walk out of this. There also were other issues. The sanctions imposed against Russia and Iran, some other countries, and also against China, the trade war, has to be handled by Biden very, very tactfully, because the economic recovery depends so much on interdependence of major powers in the world and the supply chains. Some of the major American companies which make billion-dollar profits in a year, they continue to do so during the coronavirus crisis, do so because they have got cost-effective establishments in China. So even Europeans realize that the 5G technology is so much in advance to whatever they have been able to develop themselves, and the Chinese have succeeded in integrating their economies with the economies of America and Europe and countries like India, that you cannot possibly wish it away. The same is, Trump had walked out of the nuclear agreement of peaceful uses of nuclear energy with Iran, and this had allowed Iran to go back on the promises it had made to America and the rest of the mediating countries, and it started enriching its uranium again. There have been lots of provocations. The Americans assassinated a top-ranking general in Iran. There have been attacks which may be American connivance and cognizance of Israelis killing top-notch scientists in Iran. Iran has retaliated only symbolically as of this moment. But this can't continue. Biden has promised and sent one of his trusted aides to negotiate with Iran. Iran says that, look, we did not break any promises till Trump imposed sanctions on us, causing great pain and misery to Iranian citizens. They could not afford to get medicines, food stuff, and their oil could not be exported, so their economy was almost on the brink of being brought down to its knees. Now, Iranians have also not very tactful, but they have been fighting with their back against the wall. So there have been symbolic attacks through Houthi Yemeni rebels on Saudi installations. There have been breaches of the oil embargo on Iran's export. They have been exporting it to China. They have drawn closer to China. And they also say that, look, Israelis threaten them, and they say that if we think that you are very close to making a nuclear bomb, we might attack you. The Iranian foreign minister has said this is nothing but psychological warfare. But how far can Biden go in normalizing America's relations with Iran without offending the other very irresponsible actors in the Middle East, like Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, is a master of what he does and he has no controls. So if he decides to arm himself against a potential Iranian nuclear threat or any other threat on installations, will the Americans be able to hold them in check? The Americans also have a problem that they have invested for decades past so heavily in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Qatar, and also Turkey continues to be a member of NATO. Now there are signs of anxiety among America's NATO allies, America's old-time allies, that America may, under Biden, change the policy which might adversely affect them. One creditable thing which Trump could claim some credit for was his son-in-law negotiating normalization of relationship between Israel and some of the Gulf countries, including the Saudis. So this has been on for some time, but it's coming out in open was some kind of a declaration that Middle East is in for a redrawing of geopolitical map. Now, all these things confront Biden immediately. Priority number one is the fight against coronavirus. Priority number two is immediately to bring a healing touch to a divided American nation. It also, immediately the priority is high, that how does he cope with China, how does he cope with Iran, how does he cope with Russia, how does he cope with the changing geopolitical scene in Middle East. And he of course cannot neglect that China has spread its footprint in Latin America, which ever since the declaration of Monroe Doctrine was the backyard of America. So if we keep these things in mind, we shall see that in coming weeks and months, these are the issues which will keep Biden busy. And if Biden is busy on so many fronts at the same time, including the climate change, then how much time would he have to play a more active role in international relations vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, remains to be seen. Historically, the main rival of United States of America has been earlier Soviet Union and now Russia. The two superpowers always thought that they were comparable to each other strategically in terms of nuclear arms, in terms of rocketry, missile, in terms of technology, in terms of military power, and the definition of superpower, a power which has global interest and can intervene globally anywhere, applied to both these nations, till China emerged as a contender in the arena also. Now, how has Russia been faring under Putin? How is it likely to fare in the new year? Again is interesting. Because in the past year, the corona-affected year, the Russians did not do too badly. In the beginning, it appeared that they had controlled the coronavirus. Then it came that the coronavirus was spreading there also very fast. But the information coming out of, which is no longer behind the Iron Curtain, but it still happens to be very, very slow and limited. So one didn't even know whether the statistics were telling the real story about what was happening vis-a-vis corona in the Russian state. Interestingly, Putin had taken certain very aggressive steps, annexing Crimea, intervening in Ukraine, trying to assassinate his opponents at home and abroad through very, very devious means of using intelligence agents, using rare poisons and so on. But his popularity seemed to be steadily declining, his popularity rating, all over the past year. Although he was first off the mark and saying that the Russians have discovered the Sputnik coronavirus vaccine, which has a 90% efficacy. He took dramatically a jab himself. He on television was appearing with his daughter taking a jab as well. But nobody is prepared to take whatever comes out of Russia under Putin without a pinch of salt, more than a pinch of salt these days. The reason for this is that under Putin, Russia has become practically a one-party state where no dissent is tolerated, where human rights are routinely violated, where any media person who's opposed to Putin dies accidentally or under mysterious circumstances. Now, what happened in the month of January is that one of his principal opponents, Alexei Navalny, was arrested after Navalny's supporters and his party managed to secure a large number of seats, not a majority, but a fairly large number of seats in the Siberian hinterland. Putin did not tolerate this. So far, Putin was always dismissing Navalny without even naming him. He was saying that gentleman who thinks that he wants to be my challenger, because he thought that there was no challenge which could emerge for him. But let's not forget two important things which are background. Putin is the longest surviving ruler in a major state. He assumed power in 1999 when he was in his mid-50s. He was much younger. He was projecting himself as a person who was in tune with the aspirations of the Russian youth, who shared their dreams and hopes, and he projected an image of being a tough macho leader who would play around with Siberian tigers, who would ride horses bare-chested, who would take a dip in icy cold lake or a river and emerge smiling. He was seen as a savior by a lot of the Russians at that time, in the 1999 and in the first decade of the 21st century. Because Russia, before Putin took over power, was doddering on the verge of bankruptcy, anarchy. People who were called oligarchs had corruptly taken control of Russian state's national resources, natural resources, and they had amassed riches. Now, Putin dealt with them with a very strong arm. Some were made to flee the Russian state, some were blackmailed into submission, and some knew what was good for them. They shared with Putin what they had done and they handed back the resources. So Putin could appear as a savior of Russia, which was failing, and he also combined this with a very interesting policy of ultra-patriotism. People thought that he would restore Russia to its lost prestige, which after the dissolution of Soviet Union and dismemberment of the Soviet Empire had happened. He supported Stalinist leaders like Lukashenko in Belarus. He intervened not only in Ukraine and annexed Crimea, he would extend his support to contending forces in African continent, in Libya, and strangely, in the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, he, despite having a military pact with one party, chose to overlook that and allowed Turkey to gain advantage in this region. So people were very confused. And he at times followed an adventurous policy. At other times, he seemed to lie low. But the interesting part is this, that when Putin was extremely successful and popular, the oil prices in the international market were very high. So it made it easy for him to restore the Russian economy to good health, back on rails. Right now, oil prices are low. There is some kind of a Putin fatigue among the younger Russian citizen. Anybody who was born in Russia in the decade of 1990s, who's almost 30 now, has not known any other leader than Putin. Now, Putin is no longer young. He is touching the threshold of the 70s. And Navalny is much, much decades younger than him. So Navalny can appeal as a man after their heart to the younger Russians much more than the Putin. So Putin also realizes that although he can imprison Navalny, he can brutally crush dissent, but is for the first time that countrywide, in Moscow you might say the arrest 4,000, 5,000 is not much. People coming out on the streets is not large numbers. But imagine this is Moscow. And this demonstration of protesters was being mounted right after the KGB headquarters. From Siberia to St. Petersburg, from Urals to Siberia, from Moscow to elsewhere, you have the young coming out. And despite the brutal handling of the police, they continue to come again and again. And Navalny has become a symbol of hope for future. Now, you know, the supporters are not only liberals who are asking for human rights or democracy. All sorts of motley crowd, people who think that Putin has betrayed the Stalinist ideal of the Soviet Union, people who think there have been charges of massive corruption against Putin, which of course Putin has denied. And a close friend of Putin says that the great palace on the Black Sea, which is existing there, which has been photographed, a documentary has been produced by Navalny, they can dismiss it as disinformation. But people are more than willing to believe that Putin, who should have been in the forefront of the fight against corona, except a few dramatic photo ops, has not been there. He has left, in the first phase, he left it to Medvedev to look after these things. Now, the allegations of massive corruptions of hundreds of billions of dollars and this palace are finding some credence. So people say it doesn't matter whether it is registered in his name, whether it is property or not, but the fact is that he is living a very opulent life like a czar of past, and while the average Russian is suffering. It's a very good phrase. They said that as long as on television Putin was emerging and disseminating information about the great success he has done, he had trapped the Russian mind into the successes of Russian nationalism, chauvinism, restoration of Russian glory. But slowly it dawned on Russians that their refrigerators were empty. So the battle between television, state-owned, and refrigerator, which was the reality at home, where there was less and less food, was becoming painful. So you have this problem that some of the protesters want return to a time when the Soviet Empire was crumbling, even earlier when the Stalinist state was still in place, and the state looked after the basic necessities, or the education, the medical care, the food stuff. The employment was not so bad. Now, Russians also have never been a particularly democratic nation. They have not been always open to influences from outside. But it cannot be denied that in the past 20 years, and especially after Putin last year legitimized certain constitutional reforms, which allow him to remain the ruler as long as he wants, entire lifetime if he so chooses, this has not gone down very well with younger Russians, who may not have really been very active democratically, but they think that they are being denied what they are entitled to after all these years. So in coming days, we shall also see how Russia copes with, how Putin copes with dissent against him and his popularity ratings falling. That's all we have for this week. But there is a lot more to discuss, because it's not only that America and Russia are the only two major actors on the international arena. There is China, there is European Union, there is United Kingdom, even after Brexit, and there is also the discussion of Anglosphere, the English-speaking nations, and of course, we must discuss India in the neighborhood, important developments taking place, some expected, some sudden and dramatic. We shall take them up one by one in the coming episodes. Till then, goodbye and thank you.